It's on KSHP Radio. Thank you so much for joining us on a Thursday, a very busy news day. Well, I got to tell you, the guy we have with us on the line right now is somebody I've been wanting to talk to. Of course, you know him as a former out there in Manhattan. I spent a lot of time in New York myself growing up in Connecticut. I have family in New York. And he's also the host of The Middle Unplugged on a very good radio station and big station out there, WABC. I'm happy to have Anthony Weiner joining us right now. Anthony, good to see you, my friend. Thanks for coming on. How are you?
Thank you, Brian. It's my pleasure.
Appreciate you coming on. All right, I want to ask you this to start because there's a video that went viral. I think you know the video I'm talking about a few weeks ago. You're on this PBD podcast. I've never heard of this guy before, okay? But you're on this podcast, and he rolls a list of names of people that have died that have known the Clintons, which is a ridiculous conspiracy theory, trying to make a correlation between the Clintons having something to do with some of these deaths. What do you make of these conspiracy theorists? I understand why you got angry. I got angry just watching that. And just talk about the dangers of what some of these right-wing hosts are doing.
Well, part of the challenge is that, you and I do radio. Our audiences are fairly mainstream. My audience is probably more mainstream right than yours is mainstream left. But it's important to recognize that there is a whole subculture out in the world. And it's a lot of young people, to be honest, who are seeking narratives to explain everything in the world. And that usually means that they're susceptible to hearing crazy stories about just about anything out there. And I think it's particularly true when there is this, I guess you would call it an erosion of confidence in institutions, the institutions of politics, the institutions of communication like you and I are in, the institutions of banking, everything. And so if someone comes up with a story that seems at least plausible, people are willing to believe it. And I guess what I didn't quite realize that goes on. These guys that function entirely on the internet and who really don't care much, their advertisers don't care what kind of crazy things they say. Mm-hmm. But I have to confess that I was unprepared for someone to read a list and say, did the Clintons kill all these people? And there was one point in the interview where the guy says, how are you even alive? And all this other kind of crazy stuff. Yeah. I take it seriously because I am, as you might know, Brian, I'm also the subject of some of those. Right. What's on my laptop? What do I know? Et cetera. And but I think it's ultimately, to some degree, you and I are somewhat the counterbalance to that, I hope.
Yeah, I would hope so, Anthony. I think of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Alex Jones. And, I think of, and you tell me if you disagree with this. We all saw what happened with Mitch McConnell, right, a few weeks ago, some sort of medical episode. We're not doctors, but I saw Joe Biden pick up the phone, not literally, but, he picked up the phone. He calls Mitch McConnell to see how he's doing. Democrats across the country, even though they disagree with Mitch McConnell, they're wishing him well. And then when I see what happened to Fetterman or Paul Pelosi, Ted Cruz saying it was some sort of gay relationship and Paul Pelosi let this madman in his home. And then, when we talk about, Fetterman, for example, Ted Cruz and the Charlie Kirks of the world calling him a vegetable, making fun of his speech impediments. I just think that is a fundamental difference today between most Democrats and Republicans. So what do you say to that?
Well, there was a conversation about this, how come you don't hear these stories about George W. Bush? How come you don't hear them about whomever? It could be that this is particularly a function of people on the far right, maybe the extreme far right. But I will tell you this, I have, a fairly young crew at the radio station, the guys that run the board, the guys that do the sound design, all this kind of. And when you talk to them about their experiences with media, they're not listening to the radio. There's a lot of their friends that come to them and they say, how do we know someone landed on the moon? And, we have a particular acute experience with this in New York City because there are people that to this day deny that 9/11 happened and that we were attacked by foreign homicide bombers. And for family members, and this is what I responded to so viscerally in that interview, for family members of that is a dishonoring of these people's memory. I don't know if it's a left or right phenomenon. I will say that generally speaking, I think people on the left have more fidelity in the process of government, in the process of the institutions of our life than Republicans do. I just do think that. Some of what the Republican math is about undermining our sense of community, and nothing does that better than a good conspiracy theory.
I wanted to ask you this, Anthony. There have been times where Donald Trump has been on the campaign trail and he's mentioned your name. He's disparaged you. He's disparaged your ex-wife. Here's a man who's had 25 women who have accused him of sexual assault or rape. As you know, he's also been found liable for sexual abuse. And he's the guy talking about people like you. You know, he's called you a pervert, among other things. I'm curious, what goes through your mind when you see Donald Trump bring up your name in the mud?
Well, now that I've got a radio show, it's gold. I'm not sure I mind it that much. Look, there is certain, my story is a very public one. I had a very public career. I flew pretty close to the sun and I got burned, and I was dealing with some mental health things during that time that I'm in recovery now. But I get it to some degree. I'm not terribly uncomfortable being a boogeyman. What really troubles me is when he makes victims out of people that are not celebrities. He can curse me out all he wants, but when he singles out people that are just election workers in some obscure place in Nevada or Georgia, just doing their jobs, I have little respect for that. That's bullying, plain and simple. But as far as Donald Trump, hey, the guy donated to my campaigns. He was a big fan when he was wondering who was going to be the next leaders of the city and the country. But I don't, as a personal matter, to me, now it's fodder. I'm on a very conservative radio station. And as a matter of fact, if you ever listen to my show, my radio show on Saturday, my radio show, the bumper I use is him and Joe Biden saying that they're not big fans of mine. So that kind of credentials me.
What is that like for you, though? Because I've dealt with that. I'm just curious. My whole radio career being on, and not this station, but other stations that are conservative stations that have Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham. And here I'm the only guy that's calling out Donald Trump and calling out people on the right. What is that like for you to be at a station, WABC, big station in New York, where you're right, it's a conservative station? What is that like for you?
Well, it's a choice, right? I mean, when I was in Congress, I was one. I had no problem going on Fox News and other places. For one thing, it animated my fans who like to see the battle of it. But to some degree, I always had the philosophy that we have too much one hand clapping in American political conversation right now. And I honor what you do because you have an audience that is very diverse, like I do. Mm-hmm. It is a challenge because when you have jokers to the left of you, jokers to the right, and here I am. The metaphor I use is these people come to a country and western station and hear hip hop for an hour. It's challenging, but it also is a challenge worth rising to, because unless you think we should be in a country where 45% of the country stares at Fox News, 45% stares at MSNBC, and 10% throw up their hands and then just wait to vote on the presidency every 4 years. Yeah. Unless you think that's a good thing, then I think what you're doing and what I'm aspiring to do is probably the right path.
Agree, and I think we need more of it. I have to ask you this. Even though I'm an independent, I lean to the left on a lot of social issues. I'm one that I think Joe Biden's a decent man. I think he's done a decent job as president, but I want to see somebody else in there. I'm not so sure I want to see him run again. I want to get your thoughts on that. If you had to pick, would you want to see Joe Biden run again in 2024, or would you rather see somebody else?
What difference does it make what I want? That's what we're going to get. I mean, this conversation, I call this the backup quarterback conversation we always have. We always think that the guy on the sidelines is better. If we just put him in, everything will be better. Maybe that's just coming from the perspective of a Jets fan who hasn't had a starting quarterback for a while. But
that one now.
Yeah, let's now we have to just buy an offensive line and we'll be fine. Right. Look, I mean, I agree. I think that many on the left are whistling past the graveyard about the physical condition that Joe Biden. I think the gaffes, I think the way he shuffles to the air, up the steps, I think him making these mistakes. I made light of George W. Bush when he did these gaffes because I thought it speaks to just you have it together. Right. All that being said, he's the candidate. He's going to be running on a very good record. Mm-hmm. The economy is showing signs of doing that thing that it does where it slowly turns around, the perceptions catch up with the reality. The answer is no, but the answer is no. I probably would not want him if I could just make an ideal candidate. But he has one credential that no one else has, and that is he has shown that he has beaten Donald Trump. And if my imperative is to make sure that he does it again, in a way, I kind of don't mind that. I don't mind a rematch of a bout that wasn't that close last time.
I tend to agree with you on that. Anthony, I want to ask you this. Help shed some light for me on this, because I have no idea why Republicans seem to be so obsessed with drag queens reading books to kids and transgenders. When Ron DeSantis is asked about, hey, if you become president, Trey Gowdy asked him, if you become president, how are you going to end the war in the Ukraine? And his first thing out of his mouth, he's talking about gender ideology. What is wrong with these people, and why are they so obsessed with transgenders? I just don't understand it.
Well, you're much more online than I am. I have a theory about this, and we did an episode on this whole woke thing about. I'm not convinced it's the killer issue that Ron DeSantis thinks it is, and I think part of his challenge is that he bought into the idea that this was a narrative that gets him to win the Republican nomination. I don't see it. It's not something that when people call the radio station, they talk that much about. Maybe it's, again, because maybe Republicans and conservatives we have a 50,000 watt clear channel station here, but it's pretty conservative. I don't believe that it is the boogeyman that they like. Now, I will confess that Republicans do campaign a great deal more on fear of other than Democrats generally do. Again, Democrats campaign for office, and you can always tell the difference. They have a long list of stuff they want to do. Republicans campaign for office on the stuff that they want to stop from happening, right? And so if that you take that narrative to the extent to the nth degree, it really is, I don't want anyone having power but us. And the us, unfortunately, is anyone that looks like you and I do, Brian. Mm-hmm. I mean, even though Weiner and Shapiro, I'm not sure they had us in mind either. But yeah, I think it's a lost issue for them. And you never, ever see in national polls of the most important issues that people care about, you never see those issues rising above even the tens, because I don't think people care that much about them.
Is it frustrating to you that, listen, you're a guy, you made your mistakes, you've owned up to them, you've paid the price for them, yet the front runner and the face of the Republican Party is a guy, in my estimation, that has done far worse than anything you've ever done. And yet there are Republicans throughout the country that still support him, the MAGA cult. And I call it a cult. That's what it is. Is that frustrating to you that you see the front runner of the Republican Party and all the indictments that have come down and all the alleged crimes that he has committed? I mean, what do you make of that?
I don't look at it that way. We talk in my program of recovery about not comparing and despairing. Like, yes, there are a lot of people that, no one ever went to prison for the things that I went to prison for, but that I accept responsibility. I believe in the system. I believe that even though I was prosecuted in the Trump administration, I don't blame Donald Trump for prosecuting me and things like that. But all of that being said, I think it is important to note that they might be changing, right? I mean, we say this a lot. You and I have probably said it to our friends or on the air dozens of times. Okay, this might change it. You do see gradually that the base of people that say we support Donald Trump and we just don't care is getting smaller. There's still people that support Donald Trump and who would vote for him over Joe Biden, but you can see there's starting to be an erosion. You can see that some Republicans on the campaign trail are starting to see, all right, maybe there's an electoral space where you criticize his behavior and still do much of the Republican orthodoxy. But I don't see it through the lens of, boy, this is so unfair. Donald Trump has been a fixture in New York City life for the longest time. He's been a failed businessman for the longest time. He's got a failed airline, a failed casinos, failed real estate, and everything else. We here kind of know him as a phony in New York. But I think that is that keep me up at night? No, what keeps me up at night is, do we keep moving forward and making progress now that we have a Democratic president and thank goodness a Democratic Senate? And so far, all things considered, this has been a period of some progress in American life.
No question about that. If you're just joining us, former Congressman Anthony Weiner. Anthony, if you were in a room alone in private with Donald Trump, I'm just curious, what, if anything, would you want to say to him?
I would say you can't have a refund for the contribution you gave me. I don't really know. Look, I see him as a fairly sophisticated, although overrated performance artist. I think he and I are in a completely different business. I do believe in I had a job that was in the United States Constitution also, and I think I did it with honor, and he did it with dishonor. But I haven't really thought of that. I mean, I would tell him to keep my ex-wife's name out of his mouth or something like that. But I don't know. And I don't anticipate that happening anytime soon.
Yeah. Do you see a Democrat in office now that reminds you of yourself? I mean, I remember back in the days when you were a congressman, you were one of the most passionate people around. You stood up to Republicans And a lot of people championed you for that back then. Do you see somebody in office now that reminds you of yourself?
Well, that's a tough question because I think that while I had done a pretty good job carving out a space, remember, for a lot of your listeners, they're gonna have to go Google who I even was, right? It's a good deal of time has passed, and I remember I guess it was 2010 when we were debating the healthcare for 9/11 first responders.
Right.
And it was late in the evening. The Republicans were doing something particularly dishonorable and had screwed around with an agreement we had, and I lost my temper. And I remember that it became one of these first viral moments of a member of Congress yelling on the floor. Not that it hadn't happened before, just this is, the internet era had begun. And I think that while it was nice to be affirmed for losing your temper, I think that it did start an era where now people in Congress go entirely to try to achieve viral moments, to try to capture what I was doing. I think authentically, I was tired, I was cranky, I apologize. Although I never broke regular order in that whole yelling speech. I think that now when I watch Congress, and I'm not someone, Brian, who sits at 2:00 in the morning watching C-SPAN 3, throwing shoes at the TV. I'm much more likely to stay up late watching, hockey highlights. But I will tell you that it does seem to be an almost overtly performative nature to the way so many people do the job now. There is no path for the way it used to be back in the day when Harry Reid would be an inside guy. He wasn't great on TV, but he was a good inside guy at getting stuff done. It's really hard to make an argument for someone to go to Washington nowadays to be that kind of legislator. So do I see people like myself? It's hard to tell. I don't, I stay in touch with some of my older friends there who have now been there a while. But they all report back to me that it ain't the place it used to be. It's not a really great place to go if you want to get stuff done. Now, if you want to get more followers, it probably is a good place for that.
What do you make of a guy like Jim? I mean, I could name so many names right now, but a guy like Jim Jordan, who's never passed anything in his life, and yet all he cares about is going after Democrats and Hunter Biden and his laptop and the Biden crime family. What do you make of that? A guy like Jim Jordan that remains in office that has never really passed a bill in his life, and all he wants to do is, defy his own subpoena and go after Democrats.
Look, I say keep at it, because I think if there's one thing that people kind of agree with across the political aisle is they don't like just partisanship for partisanship's benefit. Now they don't want you always to compromise, but these show trials, these guys that they bring up again, and I think, look, I took and am taking the Hunter Biden case very seriously on my radio show. It's one of the ways I credential myself with my conservative audience by saying, listen, there's something here. And so I've done lots of programs on it. Even the podcast that dropped yesterday of my midweek podcast, I went back and I read, I did a performance of some of the transcript from this guy, Devin Archer. I think there's something there. However, I think you asked how I feel about it. When I watch the Republicans do this, I think I have a good enough feel for what regular voters out there care about to know, just like with the woke question you asked earlier, to know that they're doing harm to their own cause. And that since 2016, every national referendum-y kind of election we've had, Democrats have won. And it's a combination of because of Donald Trump and because of the out-of-touch Republicans and because of the Supreme Court turning our lives upside down. And Jordan's one of that second. The out-of-touch Republicans, the more they want to do this kind of stuff, I don't think it's really getting them anywhere but feeding their base red meat.
Have you ever seen a speaker with less of a backbone than Kevin McCarthy?
Yeah, I knew Kevin a little bit. I think there was a reason the last time when you really could have gotten look, it's hard to do that job, to be speaker. People don't seem to realize that Nancy Pelosi, when she was governing with a majority almost this small for a while, and it's not like the speaker can take away your budget or take away your office or penalize you in any way. I mean, in an extreme case, she can go to the whole caucus and say, let's take away his committee assignments. There's not a lot of discipline, but Nancy had the ability, and Chuck Schumer has this to us, to say, look, there has to be a certain amount of we in this organization, that, we come from diverse places. We have the different agendas, but there has to be this sense of commonality of outcomes that we're looking to get to. The Republicans don't have that. As I said earlier, it's not like there's something that they really want to get done. A lot of them come to Washington with the aspiration of just burning the place to the ground. If that's your framework, it's very hard to lead people like that. They're nihilists. So now is Kevin McCarthy as good at anyone else of kind of getting? He's pulled some tricks out of his hat that I was surprised he was able to get done up to now. But I'm not sure. I think if Jesus Christ came back and said, I'm gonna run this caucus, do you think still guys like Matt Gaetz would not go out and do his stunts and like be no on stuff? The Republicans are not good at governing. That's the bottom line. And when you have a very small margin, it just is in stark relief that that's the case.
I tend to agree with you. All right. So, Anthony, speaking of religion, you're a man who's Jewish, as am I. I've been very outspoken as far as members of the squad are concerned, particularly the last few months. We know Ilhan Omar's made some stupid statements. I know she's apologized for those statements. I don't know what's in her heart. But when you say that Israel is a racist state, that's just an idiotic statement. So I want to get your thoughts on that, members of the squad. What are your thoughts on these, what I consider borderline anti-Semitic statements?
Yeah, so I devoted a lot of time to this when I was in Congress, and because like we would look at overwhelming majorities in the House and Senate in both parties in support of Israel, and that's the way it should be. But what we would do every so often is we'd look up at the board of some of these votes, and we'd say that there are, a handful, 10, 15, maybe more, who were voting against us. And we kind of made an effort to look. In some cases, it was because they just didn't understand stuff. They come from districts where you couldn't raise a minion. You come from places that don't understand these issues. And sometimes just sitting down and talking to them. And what it often comes down to is wherever you start, history can tell you a different story. And the David and Goliath story has been turned upside down in that part of the world. Yep. Israel is one country who's at war with 20 of her neighbors. There are people in Congress, and maybe Omar is one of them, that the politics of their district means that they're pro-Palestinian. To some degree, John Dingell of Michigan for years and years was in this case in Michigan. They come from Kalamazoo, Michigan, for example. So for those people, they're doing politics, but there are people, and I don't think it's a lot, there are people who are just anti-Semitic. And I don't, again, she's not someone I know. I don't think bunching the squad together. I think there are we have a problem on our left, I would argue, with people, with progressives not understanding the story of Israel and allowing themselves to at least, it's very easy to put on a bandana around your face, pick up a stone and throw it at an IDF officer and say, okay, look at this image we've created of David and Goliath. That's completely backwards. The only reason that person is throwing that stone is because they've got bombs somewhere else and guns somewhere else, but this is what they want to have broadcast over Twitter. All that being said is I think we have a way of allowing the tail to wag the dog. Ilhan Omar does not represent anything close to the majority. She represents a coalition of 5, 6, 7 people. And I think that one thing we might not want to do is elevate her too much.
Agree. It's interesting, Anthony, because I wanted to ask you a few questions about your political future, if you have one. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday. I said, hey, Anthony Weiner's coming on the show tomorrow. And we were having a discussion about you. And we're saying to ourselves, if Anthony didn't make some of the mistakes that he made, where would he be at today? And I thought to myself, I think you'd be running for president of the United States. So number one, do you think like that ever, even though it's probably not healthy to think like that? And my second question to you is, with everything you've been through in your life and where you're at right now, and we're glad you're doing well, do you ever see yourself running for office ever again?
Well, let me just say I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. And that is talking to you and trying to figure out a career in radio. Been on about 1.5 years, and we're doing pretty well by the way these things get measured. You would know better than I. Mm-hmm. It is true. I, for 20 some odd years, had a life in political circles that was successful. And I didn't lose elections until I started losing my mind, to be honest with you. Now, here's the lens I look at it through. There are lots of ways that people can be of service. There's lots of ways that people can improve their communities. Sometimes what you're doing is doing it. Even callers to your station that have ideas and they say, here's what I think we should do. In some small way, they're doing it. But for me, I had a nice run. I had a really nice run, and I had a chance. I came close running for mayor. I was a member of the United States. I'm a middle class guy. My mom was a school teacher. I had no business. We didn't grow up in the Weiner household like the Kennedys deciding who was going to be ambassadors, who's going to be senators. We were like middle class people, and I managed to find a career and a job in the United States House of Representatives. I think I've disqualified myself by my actions. However, people say it to me all the time. And sometimes what people say is like, oh, because of you, we got this other jackass. Well, I'm not sure that's a compliment. I think it just means in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Right. A couple more quick questions for you, Anthony, and we really do appreciate your time. I remember watching the famous documentary they did on you when you were running for mayor. I mean, that was excruciating. And that had to be excruciating for you to have cameras in your face, in your place, in your home, when all that stuff was going on. And I'm not sure it gets any more real than that. You know, we see reality television, and I tell people it's not really reality because you have a camera in front of you, but that was all going through in real time. And I would imagine if you knew that stuff was going to happen at that time, maybe you wouldn't have had a documentary made about you. I don't know. But I thought that documentary was, number one, fascinating and excruciating to watch because you saw the pain that you guys were going through at that time.
Well, I've never seen it, but
Really?
Yeah, never seen it. Partially, so I'd have to answer questions like this. But look, here's the thing. I lived it. It was very painful. It was very difficult. It caused a great deal of pain to my wife. It caused a great deal. I mean, there are a lot of people who believed in me a great deal. I was leading in all the polls and everything else. All that being said, you had a conversation earlier in the program about people who drive while drunk. I believe that addiction leads people to different kinds of bottoms. And I had a very low bottom. It cost me my career. It cost me my family. It cost me time in prison. And so to some degree, again, like I said, I didn't see the movie, but to some degree, it's a cautionary tale that we don't know what's going on in people's heads. We don't know what's going on in people's lives. I always tell people, to have compassion for strangers that are going through crazy things online, because believe me, I was in that barrel. But I don't have any plans to go watch it. I already lived it.
Right.
But I would tell you, if you ever do run for office, Brian, you're going to have people with cameras all over the place, and you're always going to want to have one of your own there too. And so this arrangement that I made with this guy, and he violated the arrangement, but the guy was that you can come take video, but if we need it on the campaign at any point, we get copy of it. And as it turned out, there was an instance where I got into a shouting match with someone at a shop who said something
a rabbi,
racist.
right? Yeah, I remember that.
If someone racist said something racist and disgusting about my wife, and I got back in his grill. And the video that went viral was me yelling at this Jewish guy at a bakery, which was not a great look. But we were able to take out the video and say, look what this jackass said to me. I don't know if it made it any better, to be honest.
Well, he was a jerk. I remember exactly what you're talking about. He was an absolute jerk in the things he said to you. Listen, it's one thing to disagree with somebody and not want to vote for somebody, but I think it's another thing to badger somebody in public like he did to you. And he was 100% wrong. One of the things that you did when you were a politician, and we touched on this a little bit, which I appreciated about you, was that you were willing to go on Fox News. You were willing to talk to those on the other side and it was always going to be a combative interview. I felt like one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, there's probably a number of reasons, but I thought one of the reasons was because I said, I wish Hillary would go on Fox News. I wish she would go on some of these other stations. You were never afraid to do that. I think Republicans and Democrats both should be doing that, right? I think Republicans should be going on CNN or MSNBC. I think Democrats should be going on Fox News. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's bad for a politician to do that?
It depends on whether you think the whole process is on the level. If you think that, look, if you get out information that is contrary to what this interviewer thinks, that's helpful because that person's audience is going to get a chance to see it. If you think that there are persuadable people in the world, then I think you try to persuade them, even if it's one person in 10 listening to you. There is an element of Christians and lions on these interviews, though. Like, I would not recommend just about any politician going on who doesn't have kind of the. I mean, I didn't mind it because some degree you cut your teeth in New York politics. You're used to people yelling at you at random on the street anyway. But I am concerned a little bit that these interviews are, maybe it's not the right way because they're just performance at some point. I mean. But all that being said, I think if you step back and say, should we look for places where the Venn diagram of people who support Trump, who support Biden, if there a Venn diagram of people in the middle who, sure, they carry their partisanship with them to the conversation, but they're open to other ideas and they're open to the idea of compromise, and they don't think that the other guy is venal. I don't think the conservatives that call into my show are bad people. With the possible exception of being Republicans, but these are people who, with whom I disagree, and some of the people that I was closest to in Washington are Republicans.
Right. Understood. What do you make of people like Chris Christie who help, at least in my estimation, enabling Donald Trump? But now all they seem to do is, speak the truth on Donald Trump, which I think is great. I guess better late than ever. But what do you make of these people that now they've waited this long, like the Chris Christies of the world, to speak truth about Donald Trump? Are they phony? What do you make of a guy like a Chris Christie?
Well, I mean, I don't know about you, Brian, but I put the Chris Christies and the RFK Juniors in kind of the same category of trying to be just troublemakers for their own party. I think that RFK is doing it to sell books, plain and simple. And Chris Christie, I'm a little less. I think Chris Christie is just scratching an itch he's been dying to for some time. There's a certain authenticity in his anger and whatever it is. All that being said, I'm not really sure that either one matters, and neither one is getting much support. Yes. I mean, the idea that someone wakes up and notices that Donald Trump is a problem at this late stage in the game, it does beg for an explanation. Like, how did you just come to this at this moment? But does Chris Christie and RFK, these people amount to anything in American political life? And what are they going to ultimately be? Great. RFK is getting like 4% among Democrats, and Chris Christie is getting 2% among Republicans. It's interesting for guys like you and me who like people that say colorful things, but I think American people are largely ignoring them.
When you're in New York City walking down the street, and I would imagine people on a regular basis recognize you, I'm just curious, what's the most, I guess, the most popular thing that people will say about you when they see you? Are they cordial? What do they say to you? I'm just curious these days, as opposed to maybe years back.
I think it's a much better documentary for someone to make, because it's interesting. Look, I'm a little bit of a Rorschach test for people. A lot of people come up to me and they say, "I'm so sorry, what happened to you?" And I try to explain to them, nothing happened to me. I'm doing fine. I've got so many blessings. I've got an 11-and-a-half-year-old coming back from camp tomorrow. I mean, I'm healthy, thank God. Then there are people who want to talk to me about something going on in the city or in their lives because they still see me through the lens of being an elected official, someone who's out there trying to solve problems, et cetera, et cetera. They talk to me about the high price of eggs as if I'm still going to go vote on lowering the price of eggs. It is an axiom of politics that people are mean to you from afar, but generally fairly kind to you in person. I think generally speaking, Americans are nice. I think people are nice and decent people. And that this weird thing that gets created, the anonymity that goes with, online life, has made us think that everyone hates everyone else. I think for the most part, people are pretty cool. Now, people do come up to me and they do give me an earful about something or other. But even then, it ends with a handshake or it ends with a wave or something like that.
I'm happy to hear.
And I think, Brian, I don't. You're a public guy too. I think generally speaking, people they're not mean to it. Like, even if you go to a ball game and someone's yelling at the umpire, if the umpire comes and leans against the ball, leans against the front row, in between innings, you'll see the guy is going to be quiet. He's going to just basically say hi, whatever it is.
Right.
I think generally speaking, people are pretty kind, and I know they've been kind to me. I have so many blessings, and if someone wants to yell at me because Bill de Blasio became mayor because of my scandal, I think they're entitled to that.
I would agree, but I'm happy to hear that. Okay, last question for you, Anthony. If you were a congressman today, the one bill that you would want to pass, the one thing in Washington right now, I know there's plenty of things you'd want to change, but what is the one thing that would be on the top of your list that you would push for?
Well, I was proud to be part of the group that helped write the Obamacare law, and that was not my starting point. I did not believe that market-based healthcare is a thing to do. I think that we have amazingly successful programs in the VA and in Medicare for single-payer healthcare systems that really work well and that people like. And so I have always been of the belief that guys like you and me guys of our age, and I know what your age is. I'm only
43.
31. I'm only 31. So that we should not have to rely upon our employers to tell us what healthcare that we get. That there should be a base level of healthcare that people get. That we shouldn't give money to insurance companies to provide it to us. We should give money to doctors and nurses and X-ray technicians to provide it for us.
Right.
So I think that we're ready now. Now that we're seeing an expansion of the role of the federal government in healthcare under Obamacare, I think now we're ready for the next step, which is to say, let's expand Medicare gradually, a couple of years every year. And I think that would save us an enormous amount of money, and also return the idea that the government, do some things well. And Medicare was an example of that.
Agree. And isn't it interesting, Anthony, all the Republicans out there that complain about Obamacare, yet they don't have a replacement plan. It's like, okay, they want to complain about something, but they don't have a solution.
More importantly, and I know we're running out of time, more importantly, they themselves, members of Congress, at the beginning of every year, they get a big booklet. What healthcare do you want to go into? And just like Obamacare was, they wanted it for themselves, but didn't want it for everyone else. And a lot of them are getting Medicare. And so all I would say is, if you know anyone who's 65, ask them if they think Medicare is a good program. And if you know anyone who's 60, ask them whether they'd like to get it early. They'd both say yes.
Am I wrong, Anthony? It seems like so many Republicans out there that complain about policies, they don't have any answers to them, and we can talk about gun control till the cows come home. And it doesn't seem to me that they want to put anything on the books when it comes to Obamacare. They want to talk about abortion and abortion rights. What are you going to do if all the millions and millions of kids out there that are looking for foster parents? They don't have solutions to problems. But anyway, we could go on and on about that. But you'll be happy to know, Anthony, I'm not going to run down a list of all the people that the Clintons have known that have died. I will not be doing that with you. I do want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about your radio show. How do people follow you? How do people listen to the podcast? How do people listen to the show? Give that information out to my listeners.
Well, it's nice of you. So we do a radio show every Saturday from 2 to 3 called The Middle. It's live on WABCRadio.com. It's available as a podcast. And then from 3 to 4, a guy named Curtis Sliwa, who your listeners may know, he and I do a show that's kind of about New York. So if your listeners are missing New York, I know there's a lot of snowbirds in Vegas. That's also on WABCRadio.com. And then in the middle of the week, I do something called The Middle Unplugged, which is just a straight podcast. And all of these things are available on Spotify and everywhere else you get podcasts.
Curtis is a good guy. He's done my show multiple times. Always love talking to him. Anthony, it's really been a pleasure. I appreciate the time, and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road. Really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to listening to your show, my man. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Anthony. There you go, everybody. That's Anthony Weiner. Listen, he's made his mistakes, but I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for him. Certainly